Thank you to Lisa and everyone involved with Aaron Swartz Day for putting this great event on, as well as to the Internet Archive for their wonderful hospitality. I have spoken at Aaron Swartz Day before, but I will give a quick refresher. My name is Smith Ellis, and I am a grassroots drug reform policy activist and advocate. I do have a number of different hats that I wear. I also do some grassroots journalism, but I'm here in my personal capacity today, so that disclaimer off the mark. I'm also I'm studying law at the New England School of Law in Boston, Massachusetts, and I find so many of these talks interesting because I think the intersection of public discourse and law and the internet is an emerging domain of democratic legitimacy, which reflects the very best of what our modern world has to offer in a time when those very best labels are few and far between, unfortunately. So initially, I was going to talk about something which is a theme of a lot of the talks I give at Aaron Swartz Day events, or at least I have given in the past, which is weaponizing the Overton window, which is the range of acceptable topics of discussion in the public forum about a given issue or person or debate. Weaponizing that Overton window to achieve grassroots policy victories in the context of legislative framing or regulatory policy implementation, or even sub-regulatory guidance documents, which are far more important and effective than most people realize. But we'll talk all about that a little bit more in a second. But my point is, dating back to the early 20th century, there's been a theme of sort of corporate domination of the public sphere by way of propaganda. It was pioneered, the discipline of public relations or propaganda, by the nephew, interestingly enough, of Edward Bernays. He was a gentleman, the nephew of Sigmund Freud, a gentleman by the name of Edward Bernays, exactly. And what's really fascinating, and why I find this sort of emerging domain of propaganda at that time so interesting, is something that Corey talked about earlier, which is the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution, and the implications of the, Corey didn't necessarily agree with my term appropriation, but I do want to talk a little bit more about that as well. The corporate appropriation of the language of liberty that was so crucial to the post-Civil War period for formerly enslaved Black Americans, by corporate interests to, in essence, indemnify themselves from oversight by state governments. And so that sort of emergence of this corporate appropriation of the 14th Amendment, and at the same time the emergence of this corporate weaponized propaganda by Edward Bernays, really forms the basis for why a lot of public policy in the 20th century in the United States, and then unfortunately due to the colonial inclinations of this country still to this day around the world, it became such a force to centralize that corporate control. Now, what's fascinating about the cannabis industry, of course, is that in some ways, in particular as to social equity, which refers to facilitating pathways to ownership of regulated cannabis companies by individuals from communities that were disproportionately impacted by the drug war. What's somewhat fascinating about this new emerging market is that it's created an opportunity to break from the norm in the American tradition and shift away from that consolidated corporate control in some regard. Not every state by any means has done well at this. Some states are just completely controlled by corporations through something called regulatory capture, where well-funded interests manipulate the lawmaking or regulatory process to centralize control and, in essence, pull up the ladder. So they get the first shot at the new market. No one else gets to come in, and then they get a monopoly or oligopoly in law forever. Some states do that. Other states, however, like Massachusetts, have done the opposite. Now, I've talked in the past about how Massachusetts created special licenses where you can only get that license if you are someone who was from a community disproportionately harmed by the drug war. But something else we did this year, which very much came about by way of grassroots advocates taking charge, framing the public discussion in a way which gave lawmakers no choice to do but what I'm about to tell you all about, and following through in a way that was meaningful. So we, as a group of advocates, went to our state lawmakers and said, you know, two of the biggest hurdles to getting into the regulated cannabis industry are funding and municipal apathy. Because banks, traditional banks, can't lend to cannabis companies or even get involved with them really in any way. So why not have the state oversee 0% interest loans and grants for social equity companies and give them directly to these companies? And what I want to talk about is the way that that debate played out and how that is a microcosm of these kind of Overton window discussions in real time and how it can have a real impact on public policy. So when this idea of a state-run loan fund, which by the way does not exist anywhere, there are no governments on the whole that give 0% interest loans and grants to private companies to open. There are subsidies, don't get me wrong, but those are multinational companies normally getting it, and it's not necessarily framed as a 0% interest loan or grant for many reasons. So when this idea was first proposed, the legislative language was 10% or 20%, either or, of the yearly excise tax on adult use cannabis in Massachusetts will go towards this 0% interest loan fund. Well, about a year later, obviously the legislative session ends, so the bill gets reintroduced. That was 2021 or so. When the bill gets reintroduced, somebody suddenly, no accountability, changes the language from a 10% dedicated yearly levy to fund the 0% interest social equity loan program to a one-to-one match program where up to 10% of the tax revenue would go in every year if there was a matching corporate donation first. Subtle change, but very much entirely undermines the program because therein, the people making the donations could ensure there was not enough revenue to give out the loans in the fund. So the policy advocates involved in this picked up what was going on. They got in the room, so to speak, and they said to lawmakers, the debate can't be between a one-to-one match or a dedicated levy. The debate has to be between, should it be 10% of the yearly tax going for this loan fund or 20%? And out of that room came a group of lawmakers who sold to the public the idea of either 10% versus 20%. And that's what I'm talking about, a subtle, small shift, but that's the Overton window in real time. If the discussion is, should it be a one-to-one matching contribution or a dedicated levy, and you lose, you get that one-to-one matching contribution, the loan fund's undermined, you lose on the policy issue. But if the discussion is 10% versus 20% yearly dedicated levy, you win no matter what the outcome. And that is, in essence, how to weaponize the Overton window in a benevolent way to achieve public policy victories in the cannabis arena, but also it can be applied elsewhere. I do want to touch on one other thing, though, because coming back to the 14th Amendment and what corporations have done to the United States by virtue of their appropriation of an amendment that was meant to benefit a race freed from slavery, I think is one of the most abhorrent trends over the past 150 years in this country, and that's saying something. In particular, to come back to something I put a pin in earlier that Corey was talking about, the way that corporations went about doing this in the context of public relations and propaganda is really something we can take a lesson from if we can pull out their tactics, not the content, obviously, right-wing fascist nonsense, but the tactics, the form of what they were doing. Someone once said that to understand Hegel's philosophy, you have to look at how its form and content met at Stalingrad in 1944. And I think that a lot of that is true in terms of taking lessons from how corporations deployed propaganda over the course of the 20th century to learn how to do it in a benevolent way. You're looking for pulling out its form rather than its content, and then turning those tactics around, weaponizing them, and then using them to achieve public policy victories. Something that I think I wanted to dive into as well is how did corporations do this? And I told Brewster earlier that I would send him this court decision, but I encourage other folks to read it as well. There's a great court case from 1939 called Connecticut General Life Insurance v. Johnson. And the dissent in that case was written by a man named Justice Hugo Black. Now, on the whole, not a good man, but in terms of this decision, very on the ball. Now, Corey talked earlier about how the 14th Amendment from its very inception was intended to benefit corporations and cover their personhood. But if you read Justice Black's dissent in Connecticut General Life Insurance v. Johnson, what you'll see is that's not the case at all. Dating back to a case from 1886 called Santa Clara County versus Southern Union Pacific, what you'll see is that the first time this idea of the 14th Amendment protecting corporations in the way that our modern legal system understands that concept was a court reporter's headnote on a Supreme Court decision talking about a secret purpose on the part of the framers of the 14th Amendment in secret congressional meetings to have it extend to corporations. That's the origin of the doctrine of corporate personhood, and Justice Black spells it out word for word in that dissent. And so even Corey, take it for granted in some regard that this is just an established constitutional principle, when in reality, this fight, I think, should never have been ceded, and as a result of doing so, we have almost lost the republic. Perhaps we have indeed lost the republic. And I guess to tie it all together, the cannabis arena represents a very unique opportunity to achieve these kinds of wins because the language of social justice matters. It's a people-centered form of discourse that cuts through a lot of the profit-driven incentives that otherwise exist in policymaking on the legislative or regulatory level. And I think there's an insight there, which is that when policy is centered on the human being, it can change the world. When policy is centered on money, it tends to be regressive, fascist, and extremely domineering. And so I guess, and I never know what I'm going to talk about before I give these talks, but I guess that's the theme of what I really wanted to convey today, which is whatever field it is you may be working within, if you're finding your ideas running into a wall, if you're not getting legislative action, if regulators are ignoring you, if newspapers won't cover your stories, don't accept that as a commentary on the work that you're doing. Look for ways to use narratives, much like a corporation would use an advertisement, to achieve your work or the goals of the work that you're doing in an applied way. And do not be afraid to play dirty in the narrative context. So if you're up against a foe, in particular if you're dealing with consolidated corporate interests, government actors, police forces, whatever it may be, I assure you they have press secretaries and communications departments who are weaponizing the Overton window against your work every single working day. And so leaving yourself susceptible to that by not actively fighting back is pretty much a way to seal your own fate before the game even begins. So I want to leave a few minutes for questions. I think I went just, long enough. I tried to only go 10 minutes and was not allowed to, so. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Yes, so I'm staying.
Questions in a minute, all right. And who has a question? Any questions?
Please.
If they were to like deschedule cannabis and make it so that banks could lend, would that, I don't know, would that sort of, how would that play out from your perspective in Massachusetts, given the kind of unique loans that are happening in the vacuum of traditional banks lending to these types of businesses? So like, if they were to deschedule tomorrow, would it screw up the 0% loan thing that you talked about?
Oh, so very interesting question for a number of reasons, and a topic I wish I had dived more into, so thank you for it. On the loan fund, no, it would probably make it a little bit easier, actually, because banks wouldn't be restricted from the FDIC rules from lending to companies, so it wouldn't impact the 0% loan fund, which is state administered, and if anything may make reasonable access to low interest capital more accessible. But there's another reason it's a huge threat, which is there's something called the Dormant Commerce Clause of the Constitution, and it has to do with states' ability to discriminate against out-of-state commerce. And it's not, right now states obviously are forced to not allow out-of-state commerce in the cannabis arena. If there were a flood of interstate cannabis commerce, it would almost certainly result in a big tobacco or big alcohol situation. And for that reason, the Safe Banking Act hasn't passed. For that reason, descheduling has not really moved forward in terms of a lot of groundswell of support from the activist community, because it's a threat. It's a threat to sort of small craft markets. However, there is a potentially functional solution, which is interstate compacts for interstate cannabis commerce only for small businesses, small locally owned companies. That might be a viable approach. I'm at the internship that I work for at the Parabola Center for Law and Public Policy does a lot of work related to this. I encourage you to check it out if you're interested in it. And there may yet be a way for the federal government to take an intentional approach to descheduling, which wards off corporate consolidation and facilitates interstate commerce. But it's certainly an evolving area and well worth watching. Any other questions?
Any other questions? Okay, so thank you very much.
Thank you.